here I have a Cobb catted Jpipe, and I'm going to be installing this on my car today. As you can see, it's really good quality. There's the front half or J section that connects to the turbo, and here I have the back section. I got the resonated version because I didn't want to get any drone on the highway. This is my daily driver after all. And under here I have a resonated Remark midpipe. During the recording of this video, I only had the Remark axlebacks, so with the midpipe, that will make this a full turbo back exhaust. I went with a resonated midpipe and Jpipe because I liked the way the axleback sounded. I didn't want to make something that was like obnoxiously loud. These parts will make the car stage 2+. There are other companies out there that still offer downpipes for these cars. They're all pretty similar. I'd recommend going with a catted downpipe. You don't really get that much extra power from going catless, and this way you won't have issues passing emissions. If you plan to add a downpipe, I'd recommend getting an E-tune or Pro Tune as soon as possible. You can probably get a base map tune from your tuner until you can bring it in to get dyno tuned. I will note, this is one of the most difficult parts to install on a VA WRX because of the nuts that connect the stock Jpipe to the turbo. They're known to get very rusty. Same with the turbo studs. A lot of people have issues with them breaking off, especially for northern owned cars with all the salt and snow. I'd also recommend doing this install when you have a day or two free. It took me 2 days to do this install by myself. If you have a newer WRX with a little rust or low mileage, you might struggle less. So now I'm going to show you guys the steps for the downpipe. The procedure is going to be pretty similar regardless of which one you get. First thing you want to do is get your car up off the ground and all jack stands. You'll need plenty of space to crawl underneath because the turbo is in the bottom. Yesterday I lifted the car up and sprayed all the bolts that I will be removing with PB Blaster. I highly recommend doing this so that you reduce the chances of a bolt or nut breaking. It'll make the job a lot easier. And don't be shy, spray them down so it can seep in. WD-40 will come in handy as well, and a breaker bar. I also have a propane torch that I use to heat up some of the turbo nuts before removing them. If you have a map torch, then even better, as that burns a lot hotter. Just make sure to have plenty of ventilation when using the torches. You will get fumes from burning the residual PB Blaster oil, and you don't want to be breathing that in. So don't mind my dirty garage, but I have my garage doors open as you can see, and I have a little window here that I'll open up as well. Side note, if you don't have a breaker bar, you can just use the handle from your jack. So I use the top part of my jack, and I can just slide it onto my wrench, and that gives me plenty of leverage. And that's what I actually use for this install to remove most of the nuts. Once you have the car lifted up, you'll need to remove the skid plate that is under the turbo. There are 4 bolts holding it in. You got these 2 in the front, and then there are 2 on the black plate in the middle. There are 12mm bolts. You will also need to remove the large plastic undertray. There are a bunch of pop clips that hold it in place. Once those are gone, you have access to the stock downpipe. Here is the current state of mine. Some of these bolts are completely shot, but luckily I don't have to remove everything. I'm going to remove the whole downpipe in one piece. There's a heat shield around the front catalytic converter that needs to come off because it gets in the way of the top 2 turbo nuts. There are 4 10mm nuts holding the shield in place. As I mentioned before, I sprayed everything with PB Blaster. It definitely soaked through, but as you saw, the nuts on the turbo shield are pretty bad, or the heat shield are pretty bad, so I'm going to just spray them down again. And then above the heat shield, there is a bracket and a secondary shield that protects the pulley. These are also going to have to come out. The bracket is mounted to the top 2 turbo studs, so it has to come out anyway. So here I got 3 of the heat shield nuts off. The 4th one is close to the turbo stud and really difficult to reach, so I'm just going to leave it for now. I've already disconnected the front O2 sensor. First, you need to unclip it from the bracket. Here is where it was clipped in. Just get some needle nose pliers to squeeze the clip and it will come out. For the electrical connector, it was a bit difficult, so be patient, especially if you have an older WRX. There is a tab on the top. I squeezed the tab and then slowly pulled apart the plug. The other O2 sensor is back here. It has a clip that is facing down, but it's difficult to reach. My recommendation is to use a screwdriver to press on the tab and then using your other hand to pull it off. For the heat shield nuts, hit them with the torch, and then once they're hot, they will break free a lot easier. Okay, so I got the rear O2 sensors disconnected. I used a flathead screwdriver to press on the tab while I used my left hand to unplug it. I had to undo this plastic panel here to give myself a little more room to work with. There is a 10mm screw and 2 pop clips holding it in place. I also undid the ground strap. It is being held in place by a 10mm nut. So this one was a lot more stubborn to remove, so just be patient. Next, I'm going to remove the bottom turbo nuts. I'm going to hit them with the torch and then use the breaker bar to break them free. All 4 turbo nuts are 14 millimeters. Okay, so good news and bad news. I was able to remove the bottom 2 nuts, but I broke the head of this stud when trying to remove it. Whoops. Ideally, you want to replace all 4 studs and nuts, but upon further inspection, the threads look perfectly fine, and I don't want to risk damaging the stud and having it become a bigger headache or having to drill it out. So I'm just going to leave it for now, and I'm just going to clean off the threads with a wire brush, definitely using new nuts though. Another issue, the final heat shield nut is pretty much rounded and impossible to remove. It looks like I'm going to have to cut it off with a Dremel. Fun. This really needs to come out though because it's in the way of the top 2 turbo nuts, so I literally can't access them. You also have the bracket that mounts to the top 2 turbo studs and shield that's under the pulley. So this bolt here is difficult to reach from the bottom, so it'll be best to access it from the top. You will need some extensions though. For the upper bracket, you'll want to spray the bolt that faces upward. It is a 14 millimeter. There's another bolt on the opposite side of the downpipe, also 14 millimeter. I removed it, but you can see the hole from where it was. There is a third bolt as well, which is hard to see and easy to miss. It mounts sideways. Here, I'll try to point it out. I have the socket on it here, and this one is a 12 millimeter, oddly enough. And here's what that bolt looks like from the top. It's the rusty looking one right here. I finally broke the bolt loose. Here is how I got to it. I used a bunch of extensions. Just be patient when you're removing it. It was tough, but it'll come out. And here is the bracket. And just keep track of which bolt went where by putting it back in the holes. Next, I'm taking out the front O2 sensor because there is a slot in the heat shield for it to fit, which means that in order to remove the upper heat shield, the O2 sensor has to come out. You will need an O2 socket to remove the sensor. This is what it looks like. It's offset and has a gap for the cable. Here is a better view of me removing the rear O2 sensor. As you can see, it's pretty simple to use. After you break it free, you can unscrew it by hand. And here is the sensor. Keep track of the front and rear ones, but they have different colored connectors and they won't fit into each other's connector, so you can't mess this up. So one thing that's interesting about the top left nut, when I was removing it, the whole stud came out with it. So now only one more nut to go. With this heat shield in the way, it's impossible, so time to get creative.
I finally got the lower part of the heat shield removed. As you can see over there, the inner bolt, that's the one that was rounded off. It's cut because I had to get a Dremel, and then I basically Dremeled out that bottom connection. So here's the bottom heat shield. As you can see, that inner portion is gone because I literally cut it out. So I was able to separate the bottom, and then so that means that it was still attached here because I cut off a section, but there's a little piece still here. So I basically Dremeled out the screw and nut, and then I was able to separate it. So now it's the bottom heat shield. It's like jammed in there, but now it's loose.
And then next, you're gonna have to use a flathead screwdriver to pry the upper heat shield off by rotating it around the downpipe. It is tight, so it won't be easy. Okay guys, so here it is. Finally got the upper portion removed. So this is how it normally sits on the Jpipe.
So as you can see, this inner bolt, I actually bent it in and cut it a little bit. And then what I did is I basically prying it, I was able to slowly rotate it and then finally pop it out.
As you can see, this is not a simple install or removal. This is why it took 2 days. You will run into issues, so you just need to be patient and not get too frustrated. And be wary of install videos online. They are usually pristine cars with super low mileage or just a year or two old. I'm showing you part of the struggles with this install so you know what you're getting yourself into. And I'm not trying to scare you guys from doing this, but I'm just letting you know, like, you could run into issues. It could go perfectly fine. It could go pretty smooth. And my install is actually going relatively smooth. I haven't had any studs break inside the turbo. Those problems are the worst because then you have to drill out the stud and rethread the hole in the turbo, and that's not fun. but yeah, just letting you guys know, be ready for anything. Now to remove the last nut. As you can see, I bent the tabs on the stock Jpipe to get more clearance for the upper turbo nut. You don't have to do this, I just did this because it made it a little bit easier for me, and I don't plan on reusing this downpipe. And here's my wrench. I loosened up the final nut, and it actually looks like the whole stud is coming out, which is great. I just used a 1/2 inch drive wrench with a short 14mm socket. I had to find a smaller pipe because I couldn't position the wrench in an angle that allowed me to use the handle for my jack. But once you crack the nut loose, it comes out with little resistance. So now the downpipe is loose. I left the nut on one of the lower studs just because there's no studs holding in the top section and I don't want this to fall off. So time to undo the spring bolts that hold the downpipe to the stock midpipe.
Alright, so here are the spring bolts. This bolt here, that is a 14mm. The nut itself is actually 12mm. And then obviously, you know, PB blaster is going to be your friend. Get as much on there as you can. Keep working at it. Eventually it'll come out, but it is kind of a pain in the ass. Oh.
If you plan on doing a full turbo back exhaust, then don't forget to undo the bolts connecting the ypipe to the mufflers. In this case, I'm undoing the bolts that connect the ypipe to my Remark axlebacks. And then if you're not going to be changing the midpipe section back at all, or the catback portion, then you can just skip this part.
The nuts and bolts on these are 14mm. I don't know if that's the case for the OEM ones as well, but double check your bolts because as you can see, that one over there is kind of like bulging out. So that one actually warped and it started to expand. So I'm not too sure how I'm gonna get that one out. This one over here, the bolts were so rusted. So what I did is I got a wrench. I got a 1/2 inch drive wrench with a 14mm socket on the bolt side, which I have facing towards the outside of the car, and the nuts on the inside with the threads. Yeah, so then I got my impact, and I got a 14mm, put it on the nut, and then as I held the bolt, I undid the nut. So this is a pretty powerful impact. I had to put it on like the 3rd setting, the highest setting. There was a lot of smoke coming out when I took it out, and this nut, it's cool now, but this nut was so hot. Yeah, these threads are just destroyed. So yeah, this bolt is actually still warm. Downpipe you might think is the hardest, but in actuality it might be these back here, because you can see the ypipe is so rusted. The Remark is fine, but the bolts themselves are struggling. And then my gasket just, you know, once I released that first bolt, the gasket kind of slipped under, and you can see there's a huge chunk of it missing from the bottom. So it looks like I might have been having an exhaust leak, and maybe that was hitting the bolts and then heating them up too much. I don't really know. If you have an impact, great. If not, use a ton of PB blaster. And if you guys can see the spring bolts that were there, I removed them. They were a pain in the ass. So now the whole exhaust is actually loose. So if I see it moves, the only thing holding it in right now is there's one bolt here. This bolt here is a 14mm. But also in the front, I believe there's one nut holding in the downpipe. There's a little clip actually holding it in place. So now I'm gonna go undo the downpipe in the front. Alright guys, here I have the downpipe removed finally. And then here is the turbo housing. Pretty cool. Not too often you get to see this angle. So here we have the old gasket. Obviously you don't want to reuse that. I got a new Grimmspeed gasket I'm going to use. I'm going to get this old downpipe out of the way. I still have the midpipe. There's a hanger that's holding it in. So this is the hanger I'm talking about. So I'm going to spray this with WD-40 and then slide this guy out. Move it back and forth with the hanger.
When removing the hanger for the midpipe, use adjustable pliers to help squeeze the hanger off of the mount.
Oh, and it's out. So before you mount your new downpipe, you know, obviously get rid of the OEM gasket, which I did. And then I have here just some paper because, like I said before, these studs actually look like they're in decent shape. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just gonna get a wire brush. I'm gonna clean these off so the new nuts, you know, go on there nice and smooth. And then also I have new studs. So these are OEM turbo studs, like Subaru ones. Like I think like $5 or $6 each. It's kind of expensive, but hey. As you can see here, 2 of mine came out, you know, or if they ever break or something, you want to get spares. So I'm gonna, you know, put these in as well. So these go in by hand nice and easily, so you don't have to go crazy with it. But obviously I do have the E-Torx, so I am gonna just, you know, make sure they're nice and tight. And the turbo studs should be torqued down to about 10 to 11 foot-pounds, so honestly not really much. And then the nuts themselves will be torqued down to 31 foot-pounds. There we go. Now I'm gonna get the gasket and put that on. So here I have the Grimmspeed gasket. And the reason a lot of people go with this one is that it's thicker, because it actually has a bunch of layers. You can kind of see like a little separation there. So this has multiple layers, so this will help, you know, reduce the chance of you getting any leaks. So here I have the new downpipe. I have the rear O2 sensor. So one thing you want to do before you put it on is get some anti-seize, so that way in the future if you have to remove it, it's not gonna get rusted stuck. I can't really find torque specs for this. What I did find is people say to go like 18 to 20 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna just tighten it to 20 foot-pounds.
I have the downpipe mounted loosely. I'm going to put anti-seize on all the turbo studs, and don't forget to mount the bracket onto the top 2 studs. It goes over the top of the downpipe like this. You have 2 bolts, one towards the back of the car, and the other one that you need to reach from up top. Alright guys, so once you have that bracket underneath installed, and you have all your nuts tying down to 31 foot-pounds, don't forget to get this bracket. This is the one that goes underneath the pulley. So right down there. So remember, the bolt that goes from the top, that's a 14 millimeter, and the bolt that goes sideways towards the back of the car, that's a 12 millimeter. And also, so for that bracket, the one that's down there that gets mounted to the top 2 turbo studs and nuts, there's a bolt near the upper right turbo stud. Since I have a Grimmspeed gasket that's a little bit bigger, that bracket is like offset just slightly, but it's enough so that that bolt doesn't fit in there anymore. So I actually had to remove it, get a Dremel, and make that hole a little bit bigger, and then I was able to stick the bolt in there. But from up top, at least here, this one appears to line up perfectly, so we shouldn't have any issues up here. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna do now is put the front O2 sensor. So just got a little bit of anti-seize on there. Got the O2 sensor on there, torqued down. Next is get the ground strap and attach that. So the Cobb kit comes with a 10 millimeter nut, if you can see right there. I'll also put a little bit of anti-seize just in case. Next, you can insert the clip for the front O2 sensor and then reconnect the plug. And then you can also go and reconnect the rear O2 sensor plug as well. So for the back half of the Jpipe, you see the bends in the OEM one? The Cobb one has the same exact bend. So that if you have a resonator, the resonator is going to go towards the back. And then you see this little connection point here. That's where you mount it. On the car, there's like a little bracket that you can mount it. So same spot. If you're using the stock mid-pipe, there is an adapter here. This is a reducer to go from the larger Cobb piping to the OEM piping diameter. If you are not using the OEM catback portion, you don't need this. If you're installing an aftermarket catback, then you'll just use regular exhaust gaskets. Cobb supplied some. There are some bolts here as well to attach the 2 sections of the downpipe. To connect the downpipe to the catback section, you will have to reuse the spring bolts if keeping the OEM setup. Otherwise, your catback should have bolts for this. The Remark mid-pipe I got has a pack of bolts for this.
So here we have the Jpipe. Run it back. Here we have the joint. And here is where it connects to the resonator section. And here's that bolt that I was talking about, that connection point in the middle where you mount it. And then there goes the back. So at this point, if you had the stock exhaust, either get new spring bolts or reuse your original hardware if it's still good. Mount it here, and then you're pretty much done. But since I'm replacing the whole catback except for the mufflers, because I have all the axlebacks already, I had to remove my midsection. So here, I'm going to show you guys how to install the midpipe, if that's something that you are also doing, as well as the rear portion where the axlebacks go. Okay, so for those of you who are removing your old mufflers or installing new ones, these hangers can get pretty difficult to remove and put on. So one thing that does help a lot is get some WD-40, spray this on the hangers and a little bit in the hole on the rubber supports in the car. Okay, so these are the hangers I'm talking about. There's one right here, and then there's one up there. So just get WD-40, spray the inside of the rubber mount, and then the hanger itself on the exhaust. Then you can just slide it in. And same thing down here. When you're removing them, they're very tough. What you can do is get a plier and kind of like grip the head of the hanger, and then squeeze it against the rubber mount, and as you squeeze it, you can push it out. Now what I got to do is get the ypipe that connects these two sides. If your mating surface is very dirty or dusty, get a wire brush and just, clean it off as much of that gunk you want to get a nice seal, because you don't want exhaust fumes leaking out. And then you can do this two different ways. Some people will put the whole exhaust together and they kind of slide it in place. I'm gonna do it piece by piece, because the thing is, since I'm basically installing the entire turbo back, not everything's gonna line up properly. So if I go piece by piece, I can kind of align them. So okay, let me get the ypipe section, because that one has a hanger on it. And then here's the stock exhaust. This is the hanger I'm talking about, and it's the same exact type that's on the rear ones. I have red hangers or mounts because that's what the Remark exhaust came with. The original one is I think like a black mount. So here is the Remark ypipe, and then here's that hanger. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay the exhaust on me. It's pretty light, so I'm gonna lay it on me, roll back, and then try to mount that hanger. And once I get the hanger on there, these are the nuts and bolts that the exhaust came with. So then I'm gonna put 2 bolts just temporarily, just to hold the exhaust in place with the mufflers so that they don't, just flop around everywhere. So I got the axleback to the ypipe. So now I just have, there's like a middle section that I need to put in, which is between here and over there. That's the one that has the resonator on it. And then here, it's really dark, sorry guys, but over here, this is where the other hanger is for this ypipe. Here I have 2 bolts loosely holding up the ypipe to the axlebacks. I have the nut and threads facing downwards so that it's easier to access with an impact if I need to remove them in the future. And as you can see, I have 2 bolts on this side as well as the opposite side. Here is the section with the resonator. It is massive. I'm hoping that I don't lose too much sound here. I like the way the axlebacks sound. It's the perfect amount of loud. I got the resonated midpipe and downpipe because I didn't want my car to be obnoxiously loud. I want the deeper tone of the downpipe though. So we'll see what it sounds like after I'm done here. So this is how this is gonna mount. The resonator portion is gonna face towards the back of the car. So this is gonna be towards the back section, closer to the ypipe. And then that section over there is gonna go towards the front. Okay guys, so these are the gaskets that Remark supplied. One thing I noticed is that there's 2 gaskets, these 2 guys, these little ones. They're actually smaller than, you see this one over here? If I place it over, that hole's bigger. So these 2 are for the ypipe to the muffler or axleback. This bigger one over here is for the ypipe to the resonator section. And then you have this other one, which is like a thicker gasket, like a paper gasket. This one's gonna go between the start of the catback, the Remark catback, and the Cobb Downpipe. So now I have the whole exhaust system very loosely installed and bolted up. So I already have the downpipe tightened down to the back of the turbo. That part's done.
I'm gonna tighten the exhaust by working my way back, starting with the back half of the Jpipe, then the Jpipe to Remark catback, then the resonator section to the ypipe, and lastly is the ypipe to the axlebacks.
And then I'm gonna show you guys real quick basically what the whole exhaust system looks like with everything in place. The front part of the Jpipe, you see where it curves, where it makes a J. And then here's the rear section with the little resonator in the middle. And then here's where the Remark section starts. Big resonator. And then it goes to the ypipe section. And then all the way to the back, where it goes to the axlebacks. Okay, so I'm gonna go, I already bolted up the front of the Jpipe where it hits the turbo. Now I'm gonna bolt up this section here. I'm gonna make sure that I'm gonna line these as best as possible. I already have the gasket in there. I'm gonna line them as best as possible and then tighten them fully down. And then there's also a bolt, the bolt that's holding it in here. Once I get that part tightened down, I'll tighten this bolt down. And then I'll work on tightening this section here. And then work my way back. Okay, I'm just finishing up the last section of the exhaust. So the axle back to the ypipe, everything else is bolted down now. So make sure you get some anti-seize. Make sure it's like a metal-based one that's designed for high temps. And then what I'm doing here is just, so I'm taking all the bolts that I had on there, removing them, putting a little bit of anti-seize, and then threading the nut all the way down. And then that way, as you can see, I spread the anti-seize onto all the threads. And this is just going to help in the future if you need to unbolt any of these.
The bolts will be easier to undo. I should have done this years ago when I did my axlebacks, but I didn't think about it back then. I was initially just planning on sticking with axlebacks and that's it, keeping it simple. But then the modification bug bit me, and here we are many mods later. By the way, I tightened all the exhaust bolts to 31 foot-pounds. This is the same spec as the turbo nuts. I couldn't find a specific spec online, but when searching in the forums and online, this is what a lot of people use, and they haven't had any issues. As long as the bolts are tight and you don't have an exhaust leak, you should be fine. If you want to use a different spec, be my guest, but 31 foot-pounds is what I'm using. Just make sure you don't over tighten the nuts. You don't want to damage the threads. Okay guys, so I finally finished. The bolts are all fully torqued down on the whole exhaust. Everything is tightened up to 31 foot-pounds. When it comes to the tips on the Remark axle back, it's probably similar to other axle backs. Have somebody hold the exhaust exactly where you want it, and then as they're holding it, you tighten it down. Because these exhausts, they do have a little bit of movement. I think it's like 5 to 10 millimeters, like up, down, left, right. So I had my brother hold this one down as I tighten it down. So I have that in that position now. And this left one, same thing, I had him hold this as I was tightening it down. So now that I have everything bolted down, the last thing to do is, so the restrictor pill is something you need to remove when you're installing a downpipe, at least for the Cobb downpipe. I'm not sure about other downpipes. You check the instructions if you're installing a different downpipe to see what the deal is with the restrictor pill. I'm gonna show you guys what that is. There's just a little tube that goes into the turbo near the inlet. So there's like a little tube in the middle. You take that tube out, and then there's like a little like bullet. That's the restrictor pill. So you just want to squeeze that out, and then put the tube back in, and then you're officially done with the whole install. The reason you remove the restrictor pill is, I'm assuming, with the new downpipe, airflow differences. So I'm assuming that restrictor pill causes issues when you have an aftermarket downpipe, at least the Cobb one. So that's why I have to take it off. But yeah, I'm gonna go show you guys how to remove that, and then everything's officially installed. And then we're gonna load. I have the off-the-shelf tune for the Stage 2 Plus. So I'm gonna load that onto the car, and then I'm gonna turn the car on. Make sure that there's no leaks near any of my gaps. If there's leaks, got to get back in there, and then, you know, loosen the bolts, try to readjust the pipe to recenter it as best as possible, and then tighten it again. But everything's torqued down, so I'm hoping I don't get any air leaks, but we'll find out. Yeah, and also, so when you're doing the tune, my car has sat for literally about a week. Make sure the battery is charged,
before you start loading the tune, because the last thing you want is for your battery to die mid-tune and then you potentially brick your ECU, because then you're going to be in real trouble, because then your car won't even move. You won't be able to do anything with the car. You're going to have to get a new ECU, and it's a whole mess. Don't do that. So I have like a little battery like trickle charger, so I'm going to just plug the battery in, charge it while I'm doing the tune. The tune usually takes like, I think 10 minutes or so it's pretty quick. But at the same time, you know, you don't want to run the risk of your battery dying, especially if your car's been sitting for a while. So right underneath the turbo, you have this T connection here. So this clamp I just undid, so there's a clamp here. Get some needle nose, squeeze it, move the clamp out of the way, and then pull this hose off. That's where the restrictor pill is, like I feel it. So you just want to take this hose off, and then use your needle nose to kind of pinch the back behind the pill, and then squeeze it out. And then once you have it out, put the hose back on, put the hose clamp back on, and then you're done. So I've just been squeezing it out, slowly coming. And there we go. Now it's out. Okay guys, here's the pill. So now this is out, we can put the tube back, put the clamp back on. Okay guys, so I have my battery connected here. Here's my trickle charger. I checked the voltage, it was actually a 12.45, which is still pretty good. I think if it's below, what, like 12.4, that's considered like 75% charge. If it's below 12, you definitely want to charge it before you do anything. And then just an FYI, at least the way mine works, make sure the charger's not plugged in yet, because you don't want any juice in it. You plug the positive lead first, then the negative lead, then you plug it into the wall. So I'm gonna give it like a few seconds, check the voltage again, make sure it's a little bit higher than before. And also, before you turn the car on, make sure you wipe the entire exhaust to get rid of any fingerprints. So I wiped it with isopropyl alcohol. You know, you don't have to go crazy, you just wanna make sure there's no fingerprints, because if there's any fingerprints or oil on it, that's gonna burn into the exhaust. So basically the fingerprints will burn into it once it heats up. And I mean, it's underneath the car, so it's not that big a deal, but most people don't want that. All right guys, so here you can see, I went to go change the map, and I'm gonna load here the Stage 2 Plus Big SF. I'm gonna do 91. I normally put 93 in the car, but I'm gonna run 91 just to get like more knock protection. Also because it's just the off-the-shelf tune, so I'm gonna get Pro Tune eventually. So I'm gonna hit Stage 2 Plus, hit the center button. Just please wait. Tandem car battery charge is recommended. Please turn off headlights and climate controls. So I'm just gonna turn my headlights off. So it tells you, you know, to charge it. So I'm gonna hit OK, continue. So it says do not turn off vehicle or unplug access port. So now I'm gonna let this do its thing. Okay, it says turn and leave the ignition in the off position to begin vehicle initialization. So you hit continue. So it says please leave the ignition off while the vehicle reinitializes. So this one goes by pretty quickly. And it says please turn the ignition key to the on position so access port can begin the reset procedure. I'm gonna hit continue. And now it's gonna reset the ECU learning, because now it needs to relearn everything from air fuel ratios, the amount of fueling and all that. And now here we go. Change map successful. Please turn ignition key to the off position for at least 15 seconds before starting vehicle. So I'm just gonna take the key out completely, wait 15 seconds, and then we're ready to turn the car back on. And there you have it. That's how you do the full turbo back exhaust. In the comments down below, let me know what you guys think. Was the video helpful? Anybody watching have a WRX that has a full turbo back? What was your experience with the downpipe? Did you have any issues? Was it smooth? How do you like the car now? It's definitely a lot more fun. The car is way faster than before, especially after being Pro Tune. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.